Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and something I've got into several debates in real life with friends of mine, not necessarily stuff here on YouTube or in the fitness world, but it does come up in the fitness world, is this whole topic of GMOs or genetically modified organisms. They're really a big deal these days, and they have been a long time. A lot of you have actually been consuming them your entire life, whether you're aware of it or not. And the debate that always comes up with people is that I hear people say we should ban them, we should ban Monsanto, we should ban these products, or we should make mandatory labeling on everything. So I think it's time for us to step back and assess this and look at what's really going on here. I want to talk about it from a couple different angles. I want to talk about it from the scientific and safety perspective so that people really understand what's going on, at least in layman's terms, and then I want to talk about the ethical implications of some of it, and particularly the ethical implications of what these companies have done. And it's not going to be what a lot of you think it is. It's going to go way out there. All right, so let's look at it from a scientific and a safety perspective. What people don't seem to understand is that we have been selectively breeding crops for most of recorded history. There are a lot of things that we all eat that we consider to be some of the healthiest foods in the world that actually do not exist in nature at all. They're completely man-made products in the form that they're in, that if you saw them in nature, they wouldn't be edible and you wouldn't even recognize them. And again, things like broccoli, cauliflower, bananas. These are all man-made products. Simply put, these things do not exist in nature, and they are loaded with nutrients and phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals in much, much larger amounts than things found in nature. We've cultivated these crops to be what a lot of people like to call superfoods. We've made these through selective breeding. And when it comes down to genetically engineering foods, genetically engineering plants, we are producing plants that sometimes have a higher nutrient profile. We are genetically modifying foods so that they're more resistant to certain types of blight, certain types of insects, so they pollinate differently, so that we can create much higher crop yields, much higher crop density on the same amount of land, for the same amount of fertilizer, for the same amount of labor. It increases crop yield. That's one of the biggest deals with it, to fight off various blights, diseases, insects, or just faster reproduction and growth rates on these things. And people say, oh, it's not safe, we need more testing. You can't go and do 100-year test on every single modification that we do. And here's the thing. Yes, there's a small, microscopically small possibility that something that they've done to one of these could harm you. But you know what? There's the same amount of chance that you just eating something that you find in the wild that was thermally safe for 1,000,000 years and not toxic, that there's been a random mutation to that plant. Or if we're growing a crop, whether it's corn or bananas or whatever, there is an equally likely, extremely rare possibility that a natural mutation will do the exact same thing to you, that it could be harmful to you. And in fact, it is more likely statistically, and this is what people need to understand from the safety perspective, it is statistically more likely that a naturally occurring mutation in one of these crops that has nothing to do with our GMO could be harmful to you than our actual GMO modifications. Let that sink in for a minute. We're at least controlling the GMO modifications. We know what they do for the most part in the plant. The mutations that occur in the wild are completely random. You are far more likely for that to be harmful, the nature to be harmful, than what we're doing with GMOs. So this idea is we're really pushing it to the point of silliness. Mutations occur every single day in our crops randomly, even if we try to control it and prevent them. We can't. It doesn't work that way. Mutations occur in all species. That's a known fact of biology. We can't bypass that. We don't have the technology to stop that. All we're doing is controlling certain components to give us higher crop yields. So what that has effectively done is made your food cheaper and more abundant. If we don't have GMO, the cost of the foods goes up. It goes up dramatically. And the thing is, people will say, well, we're losing all the heirloom crops, we're losing this, we're losing that. Not really. In theory, we could selectively breed those back into existence at any time. All these crops that we eat and we grow that we genetically modified, again, they don't occur in nature in that form. These aren't naturally occurring products. And that's what people need to understand. Everything that we grow in agriculture, we have selectively bred to have the traits to make it amazing foods and foods that we grow for crops and in agriculture. It's not some food found in nature. We made them. And since we're just making a different version of it, it's not that big of a deal. Now, there are ethical concerns here with the way these companies do things. First of all, a lot of them have made it to where you don't have the heirloom seeds, in the sense that we would have to go and cultivate these things again from the wild oftentimes, because they lock down the process. They require it to where you have to buy their seeds every year. But that is actually one of the ways that we control mutation. So there's a good and a bad to that, because they have the original plants and you've got to redo their seeds. There's less random mutation through the generations growing in your field, because they have a smaller control on the number that they have. So there's actually less chance for mutations with them controlling the seeds. But the downside is that you become reliant upon them. And while that's a good business practice for making money, it's probably not the most ethical practice for farmers and for them dealing with their customers. It's kind of unavoidable at this point. There's also the ethical implications of when companies like Monsanto have sued people because other people's GMO crops, the pollen has gotten into their fields with their more heirloom crops, and then they want to try to charge them for it when they haven't intentionally put any of Monsanto or any of the other GMO companies' seeds out there. And so again, that's just being dicks. That's poor ethical practices. But that's not the biggest ethical concern. The biggest ethical concern is that the GMO food companies, while maybe they meant well, they're largely responsible for world overpopulation at the moment. That's the big issue, and this is the biggest problem we have with banning or regulating GMOs out of existence. The world population without GMO crops can only sustain about 3 billion people. And that's what we had going before the GMO foods occurred, and they allowed us to have these massive crop yields to feed all these people. We've allowed third world countries that were starving before to double or triple in population size as a result of GMO crops. And so what we now have is a true ethical problem, because not only have we pushed the world population beyond what we can sustain easily in terms of pollution, food, and everything else, the GMO companies have created 3 billion people basically that are reliant upon them to even exist. If GMO crops disappear, fortunately for us, there's multiple companies doing it. So if one company goes under, there's others that take their place. But without the higher crop yields that they produce, 3 billion people in the world starve to death. They're artificially propping up the population, and they've created a population that's dependent upon them. And they know now that if they go under, that 3 billion people die. So no one is going to dare push them under, and that's something that needs to be considered. That is the biggest ethical concern with the GMOs, not the safety for everyone else. And here's the thing: if they do that, if GMO companies go under, we outlaw them or regulate them too much, and our food production cuts in half around the world as a result of it, that will trickle out to us in the first world as well. Our cost of our food is going to go up astronomically when there are millions, hundreds of millions of people starting to starve to death around the world all at the same time. I can assure you that the supply and demand chain is going to change on your food. Getting grains and fruit and vegetables and everything else is going to become astronomically expensive, because all the food manufacturers are going to have less of it to give you. The farmers are going to have less food to give you, and so the cost is going to go up. You're all of a sudden going to be paying sometimes $2 for a banana. So I suppose not only would that solve world overpopulation problems, it would resolve the obesity epidemic as well. But I don't think we really want to see that happen. That's the scariest part of the GMO thing, really, is that the supply and demand chain could become massively disrupted if anything goes wrong with the technology, or governments jump in and ignorantly do something at this point, because GMO is actually required to sustain the world population where it is. Without it, we lose 3 billion people within 1 to 3 years. So it's a pretty big deal, and that's the real ethical concern. It's not the safety concern. People who are really overly concerned about the safety component of it and think that they're potentially dangerous or whatever else is either ignorant of science or a bit of a kooky conspiracy theorist. And the point I've brought up with friends of mine who argue this, they're not always in shape. They're not fitness advocates, yet they're making such a massive deal about GMOs. And I look at them and go, why are you worried about a possible health risk from something that's like 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million that there might be a health concern when you drink soda, when you eat fried foods, when you cook with vegetable oil? We know for a fact consuming large amounts of refined sugars or significant amounts of refined vegetable oils are harmful to you. We know that for a fact. So why are you consuming the foods that you know are going to harm your health while screaming about not being told that a given product might have a 1 in a million chance of harming your health to a greater or lesser extent than the foods that you're willingly consuming knowing they have a health risk. It just seems really silly to me when people do that, and I just don't get it. And again, these are some people who I love to death, who are actual good friends of mine, who promote this sort of stuff and argue about it, and they're so ignorant about it, and I've had to tell them that, and they just don't get it, that they're just willingly consuming this stuff that they know is going to kill them early, that they know is causing them to be overweight, that they know is causing them to have health problems, and just happily consuming it every day while complaining and wanting laws written to change something over a tiny microscopic risk that it might do the same thing that they're willingly doing to themselves on a daily basis. It's just hypocritical, and I just don't get that mentality. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.